Well, hey there. I'm Pastor Cody.
I'm Pastor Matt.
And we're here to have a conversation.
Welcome to the conversation.
To our abode.
This is the way.
This is the way.
Thank you.
If you're looking at our mugs here, we've got two Mandalorian mugs.
Yes.
And they have this cool feature where the top just comes right off. And
how do you do it? Do you do it like this?
Huh?
Do you set it down like this?
Well, if you really wanted to be fancy, you could take it and pour into it and then drink from it.
That would be difficult to drink from, I'll say. Thank you for my mug, though. Cheers.
Cheers.
Yes.
Mando
Mondays.
Mando Mondays, even though this is technically on Tuesday.
Oh, yeah.
But, yeah.
Dead giveaway.
Hey, dead giveaway. So we're here today. We are talking about his message. So we're here.
Shout out to you, Jason. Love you.
Shout out to Jason. So we're here today, and we're talking about your message from Sunday.
Yes.
Which the title was Pride, the Problem.
Yes,
and
it is a problem.
First off, out of the gate, I just thought it was super, and this kind of goes back to our 5 whys conversation that we had last week or the week before, but it was interesting how you kind of got to the root of the whole immorality issue at Corinth with pride being the common denominator there. How did you arrive at that? I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just asking how you got there.
Where the heck did you get that? Looks like severe eisegesis.
You're like, incest. Yeah, that's pride right there.
Oh, that's funny. That's good right there. Yeah.
This is the way.
This is the way. I think we're just having a good time today. This is literally how our conversations go.
I love it.
He just like telegraphs it in the beginning, and do you have the Bible pulled up?
I don't, but I can.
I can pull mine up.
Go ahead.
He telegraphs it in the beginning. I think I have it here. If I look at
5:2.
Yeah.
1 Corinthians 5:2.
Hold on. I'm declining calls here on my phone. So Paul identifies pride the problem and sees it among the leadership, but he telegraphs it before he gets there. So chapter 5, verse number 1, he addresses the sexual immorality, the issue, which is pretty crazy.
Yeah.
But before he did that, he says, look, if I come and I observe what you're doing as a church, and he says, I'm going to come. Do you want to do this the easy way or the hard way, right? The end of chapter 4. Do you want me to come with a rod, or do you want me to come in love and grace? And basically he says, chapter 4, let me just pull it up here. I'll keep referencing it. And
I did think it was funny in your notes from the program here. It's in parentheses. I find this a bit comical.
Because it is. I love the way he puts things. It's hilarious. But here at the end, he says, in his fatherly care, right, which I thought was so interesting. I think that's part of it, right, is seeing that Paul is coming as a father, is coming to them, in fatherly care, sending his son, right, to be a father to them. So we get this pattern, right? But he says in verse 18, now some are arrogant, as though I were not coming to you. So in saying, right, in this letter, look, you guys are doing things in your own power. You're doing things. That's like the theme, right? 1:17, 1 Corinthians 1:17. If you're not careful, you're going to empty the power of the cross, 1:18, because of your eloquent words, because of what you think you're adding to the gospel. And so that's really what he's been building to, is you think you're adding something to this, but really what you're doing is you're taking away its effectiveness. And and then we get to the place where he's actually about to come out of the gate and address the issue. And what he addresses isn't the sexual immorality first. He addresses at the end of chapter 4, he says, now some are arrogant, as though I were not coming to you. And here's what I get in that. I get the sense that they think they're on some kind of island. They think that what they're doing is not connected to their spiritual father. It's almost like the prodigal.
Yeah.
Right? The prodigal goes out, right? But then he ends up coming back. And so the father at this point, right, even in that analogy, he's waiting for his son to return so that he can father him again. So to me, it's like this church is literally out there riotous living, right, in that sense of being the prodigal. But what Paul doesn't say is that you're out there riotous living, performing riotous living in the Las Vegas of the ancient world in sexual immoral acts. He says you're out there in your pride. There's arrogance among you. And so that to me was like, he telegraphs that. And then what really, at first I'm like, well, why does he say that? And then you start reading chapter 5, and after he addresses the elephant in the room, he uses the elephant in the room as a symptom. He doesn't say it's the problem. He said the symptom here is the fact that you have someone that is among you that is being immoral, and you're not grieved by it. You're still in your arrogance. You could have addressed this to where this man could have been put out so that his soul could be saved. And I know that there are different commentators take that verse in a couple different ways where it says his soul, put him out so his soul could be saved. But that's how I see it. Mm-hmm. And so for me, it's like the issue to Paul was not this man. Of course, that was the issue, an issue as symptom, but the issue was the way the leadership was handling that in their pride. And so that's why I think pride is the problem here. And that's kind of how I got there, if that makes sense.
No, that actually does make total sense. And when I think about that, like I kind of get the vibe from the conversation, if you're kind of reading into it a little bit from just what's going on behind the scenes of the letter, I kind of gather that, you know, whoever these people are within the church, you know, they're like, well, who cares what Paul thinks?
100%.
Like it doesn't matter. And that's like, you know, for him.
He's gone.
Right.
He's not here.
Yeah. And then just lost my train of thought there.
Sorry.
No, it's
Was
okay.
that my fault?
Mando Monday.
He needs his brain back.
Mm-hmm.
My goodness.
Good point.
Yeah.
But I read that and I'm like, you know, that's like a slap in the face to Paul as their spiritual father, where they have gotten to a point where they're like, the way that we're doing things is fine. We don't need Paul anymore. We don't care what Paul thinks. And that's kind of what I get from it. Do you disagree with that?
No, I don't disagree. I think that it's telling.
It's very telling.
Right.
But I never really put together in the conversation that was kind of like the immorality was Paul's lead in to be like, hey, you know what?
You're arrogant.
Yeah,
because, and this is what I said this on Sunday. The problem for me is that everyone's always talked about this book as being the book filled with the horrible sexual immoral church.
Yeah.
And really it's like, well, yes, but no. Mm-hmm. The idea is like I could easily find the American church in this church over and over and over again. You know, and we talked about it from, you know, and this is obviously a conversation for our church people. And if you're listening and you're a part of another covenant community, the idea is these church leaders were in love with themselves and how they were doing ministry, and they were not in love with what ministry does. They were not in love with the product of the gospel, therefore they were not in love with the gospel. Therefore they were in love with themselves.
Yeah.
And on the front end of that, what Paul is saying, I'm coming to like rectify this situation, and even if I'm not there, Timothy's we're gonna know. I get the sense that it was like, as soon as I hear the first sermon, as soon as I hear the first conversation, you know, with you leaders, like I'm going to know your heart in this and whether or not it's powerful or not, whether or not the Holy Spirit's in it or not. And I think we know the answer. He was not.
Yeah.
And so church work, it's, you know, it gets sideways so fast when we are, when we enjoy hearing ourselves talk, when we enjoy the aspect of ministry that is, let's keep it warm. When we enjoy the the aspect of ministry, you know, that allows us the filling of pride instead of the filling of the Holy Spirit. It's, and remember, this is all coming from 1:18. There are people that are actively being destroyed. Paul is like, look, there is tons of ministry to be done around you. There's tons of
those that are being destroyed or going without because of the way that their conduct reflects on them.
Yeah, this is a problem. This is an issue, and it's pride.
And I think what you said is so powerful that to add to the gospel is to take away.
100%.
And that's a one-liner if I've ever heard one. Probably put that out there on a quote.
Put it
with
out.
Your face.
Tweetable.
Yeah, Paul. Yeah, and I never really read it that way because the stock view of the book is like, you know, if you want to talk about immorality and how to deal with those things. Like, oh, well, let's go to 1 Corinthians and see what Paul told the church.
Yeah.
But that's not untrue.
It's
but
not.
at the same time, it's like, where does all that come from?
Right.
What is the origin of these, not just the issues, but like why they continued to persist.
Mm-hmm.
And they continued to persist because people thought they knew better. People, they didn't care about what Paul thought as their spiritual dad. They had daddy issues.
They did.
But that's a really good way of looking at it. And when I was listening to it, I was like, that's really not a point of view that I've heard before.
Mm. Well, for me,
so
too,
it must be bad.
It's terrible. It's awful. No, and it's not. I'm not in an echo chamber. This was something that, many, as I read, and studied on it, like many take this view and this perspective, and it's not diminishing the sexual immorality. It's just pointing back to what we should do in cases of of problems and things that are problematic. It's like what's happening with the leadership.
Yes.
So anyway, I think another. Where was I going with that? I was going to say something in regards to so the glamorous aspect of church too. It's like the pastor and the leaders, and I just want to attain something. And I think people have that perspective towards it, but really. And this is something that we've tried to build Bethlehem this way in our DNA is like, for instance, we have 6 different teams, right, of people that serve in our church. The worship team, everyone that's on that is a part of helping worship happen. The future team are all of our kids ministries.
Shout out to all my future team workers out there. Love
right.
you.
The beauty team,
except you, Kenny.
That's right.
Because I know you won't listen to this.
He doesn't listen?
He does. He was like, I'm behind. I didn't listen to last week.
Oh, that's funny. But anyway, we break it down into teams. And our team that, is basically our leadership team, we call it our support team. And that's the elder board, even the finance committee. Everyone falls under the church leaders fall on the support team. And we call it that because we believe that the leaders are here to support and serve the church. Not the other way around.
Yeah.
And so if we can maintain that posture towards our people, then we will grieve when there's an issue, when there's a problem. And there are people, like I pray every day for folks that have left our church community that I believe should be here, that I believe should return. We talk often, about folks that we just believe should be here. We know that they're a part of our church, because the Holy Spirit has made that clear. And we're just waiting. Like, it's not a matter of like, if, it's more of when that's going to happen, because I believe in the power of prayer and I believe that we're handling that situation correctly, and so, anyway, I just think that the optic of what church leadership and what church looks like, to some, it's like, man, I would love to be in that position, but really for people that are actually in it, if that's the attitude that we have, we've got it backwards. It's a hard thing to be in leadership, to be a pastor. It's not an easy job. It's a hard job. It's a job that we commit ourselves to grieving. We commit ourselves to praying. We commit ourselves to spiritually fathering those that do not want to be fathered in those moments and in those times. And it is having those hard conversations. It is those difficult things. And you say, well, really? Yeah. Like, even before those conversations ever happen, before the Lord opens a door, an opportunity to even speak of it, chances are I've already been praying about it. I've already been thinking about it. My heart's already broken for folks that I know are in my church community that are living in sin. This is not an easy job. And that's where the celebrity, glamour, pastor type of perspective on social media is
just no good.
It's no good. It's so wrong, because it's this pastor that's so far removed from that ministry work. This is Paul. This is
if there was ever a superstar preacher, it's probably Paul.
And the man's naming names, talking about people, that were in leadership, and he's ministering to these people. So I just think we've, and I'm not, and this isn't a personal attack towards any denomination or any leader. It's just, and I'm sure that even those, what we would call celebrity pastors, they're doing ministry work.
Of course, yeah.
They are, crying over and praying for it. I'm not saying they're not. But what I am saying is the comparison and the people that don't understand what goes on behind the scenes, that thinks that is the ministry and that is the brunt of it. It is not.
Not at all.
And so don't let our minds get consumed with this idea that this is what ministry looks like, because it's not. And that's what Paul is saying here. Look, leadership. Look, I'm coming to correct some issues of pride within the leadership and their attitude and their posture towards the people that God has given them to shepherd is not right and it's not correct. So I just think it's important for us to see, and also, selfishly for me to tell you, like, this is what I need prayer for. A lot of people, what do you need, Pastor? Do you need help with this? Well, yeah, we could use help in areas of service and ministry, but what I really need is for you to be praying for me. I need you to pray for discernment for me, for Pastor Cody, for our other elders.
Especially for me.
Why? Because we're bearing a burden. We're carrying that. And, why is it that pastors don't last long? Why is there no longevity? Well, they're probably not resting. They're probably not in good, healthy rhythms. But this is not a normal job. This is not like clock in, clock out. We should be, as church leaders, carrying the weight, and that weight sometimes is grief over the way, our congregants, parishioners, however you say it, over the weight of how they are living or how they're not living. And so that proper posture, that attitude, the effectual fervent prayer of a righteous man, that's not always in a, happy spirit. Sometimes that's lamenting.
Yep.
And it's difficult. So those things are things that we carry. And so that's where pray for your leaders, pray for your pastors, and fight against the mentality that this is a position that is showcased and that is show. It's not. Ministry does happen in the proclamation of the gospel. I hope you were helped by the message yesterday, but that's not all of it.
Yep.
And we can't get that focus. Anyway, I digress.
To tighten the focus a little bit there.
Sorry.
No, that was good. That's really good. To tighten the focus a little bit. So we're talking about the conduct of the Church of Corinth and how that reflects on them, and how that, Paul's hitting on the fact that it's not, the way that they're acting has consequences beyond what they can even see. And he points to that. And so you have an excerpt here from Taylor's commentary. And it talks about how, 1 Corinthians 5 all the way through 6, verse 20, is bound together by an eschatological focus. And you talk about how, the way that you worded it, you were like, listen, Paul's literally tying this to end times. Paul is tying this to the end of days. And that is the gravity of the conduct of the church, is that what we do, how we represent Jesus to the world around us, like, it has everything to do with the end that we have in sight.
Yeah.
And what I thought was interesting when we're talking about this, the commentator talks about how Paul references these two vice lists that are found in Deuteronomy. And I was like, it's also really interesting that Deuteronomy is and if you've ever read Deuteronomy, some of you probably have, some of you probably haven't, but the Pentateuch as a whole is there's origins, there's all sorts you have the Sinai covenant, but as a whole, like, the book points to the failure of the Sinai covenant, how it, from day one, it just wasn't going to work. And at the end of Deuteronomy, when Moses is addressing Israel, he's like, you're going to go into the land, you're going to break the covenant again and again. And then, but there's going to be one who comes after me. There's going to be a prophet that comes, and you need to listen to him. And the term end of days comes up a lot in the Pentateuch, starting in Genesis. It's one of the things that, that Jacob talks about on his deathbed with his children, is the end of days. And nobody really thinks about, Genesis, Exodus, all the way through Deuteronomy as eschatological, as end times. But the writer is looking forward to, a time when God will fix and remedy what happened at Sinai that just didn't pan out well.
He'll reverse it.
Yeah.
Not that, I guess. But
well,
the curse.
Yeah, you get what I'm saying. But I just thought that was interesting that Paul.
I was just trying to plug Reversing Herman.
Right.
It didn't really work.
Sorry. Read Reversing Herman if you have not.
Book.
Dr. Michael Heiser. It's a really good book.
We're fanboys over here.
We are fanboys. And Dr. Heiser, if you ever listen to this, which you probably won't, we love you so much. But yeah, I thought that was just interesting that Paul gets all end timesy, eschatological, and coincidentally, there's some nuts in there from Deuteronomy, which would have been viewed by Paul and the writers of the Pentateuch as eschatological. I thought that was cool. Yeah. But that's just me, nerding out over that.
Well, as you nerd out over that, I think it's helpful for our listeners to understand that, Paul's tying into that eschatological timeline where, they were connected to something. It wasn't like this separate eschatological timeline,
right?
That was crafted maybe years later, and books later, and people that try to force us into a mold. Like, this seems like one story.
It's almost like it's one continual story that has a desired end. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's just, and
Paul's calling from, this eschatological timeline that we see in Deuteronomy, the same sort of law and things that he's trying to teach this church.
Yeah.
He's pulling from, the Pentateuch. And then they're all, looking forward to this day of the Lord time that they keep referencing.
Yep.
So it almost seems a lot more simple.
A lot simpler than maybe we think.
You're right.
And I think so much time is wasted thinking about, like, how exactly does this play out? How does
where we're searching in Daniel.
We're searching in Daniel, Revelation, and Ezekiel, and how does all this trying to craft a system, right, that works together.
That's it.
Yeah,
the story, it kind of fits together. Yeah, and it can be a lot easier to understand.
Yes. And that would be, I think that because anytime, anybody who you ever talk to, when you talk about Bible study, they're like, "Oh, I love prophecy."
What you think about prophecy?
Right. Oh, I love studying the end times. And I'm like, "Oh, okay, great. You probably have all the John Hagee books on your bookshelf then."
Blood Moon.
But the simple part of it that I think we should focus on as believers and Christians, as far as in regards to end times eschatology, is that our conduct of the church matters.
It does.
What we're preaching and teaching matters. Why? Because the end times, quote unquote, I don't even like that term very much, but I haven't found something to replace it.
But I think it's meaningful to use that because that's what
resonates with the culture.
Our church people, like, when they hear that, they think like Left Behind, and so what we're trying to say is, instead of thinking about Left Behind, think about your neighbor. Lord. Think about your neighbor. Think about the Lord is coming. The Lord is coming back, not in that context and in that way that it has been dramatized and formalized by these other authors, but like the gospel writers, Paul, the epistles, these letters, he's kind of pulling things together. He's tying things together, that the Lord's coming back. He's going to establish his kingdom here on earth.
Yeah.
And he's going to restore Eden.
Yep. It will be restored.
It will be restored. And so it can be a lot simpler, and we don't have to have all the answers. And, from that perspective, it gives us a focus, not on this, next event, but on what we're going to do today, how we're going to love today.
Yes.
How we're going to act today. He pulls the church's actions and our responsibility into how we're supposed to live, and that affects the future events that are coming.
Yeah, and I think that's really good. And I think that, and what's funny is we spend so much time. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of books have sold on that topic, and Paul of all people is really clear. Like, hey, don't focus on these things. Hey, here's what matters: the Lord's coming back at some point, and we need to be ready. We need to be evangelizing, gospeling our communities. And that's what really matters. There isn't a timeline out there that makes full sense. There isn't, none of it matters. I mean, it's good fun, but at the end of the day, like, where the rubber meets the road, it just doesn't matter. But that was really awesome that you kind of tied all that together. Let's see what we got next here. So this will probably be the last little topic that we cover. I did listen to this part just a few minutes ago, actually, but you were talking about Paul's use of the imagery of unleavened bread, which, if you're familiar with Israel's history, like, unleavened bread carried a lot of weight as far as being a picture or an analogy of, a lot of things. But let's see here. So, yeah, let's unpack that a little bit. You talked about how Paul ties, you have this picture of leaven as sin, and he uses that to describe to them like what exactly is going on.
Well, I mean, I think that it was something that they understood.
Mm-hmm.
It was something that made sense to the Jewish community that was there.
Yeah.
And then he's trying to, bridge the gap to this Gentile community that's there and kind of make this thing work. Because this was definitely a melting pot. And I think, too, this is like, you have Passover and then you have the Lord's Supper. And correct me if I'm wrong, you would probably have a more rounded view of this. But just instituting Passover, in the church in a new way, a new covenant way, it's the Lord's Supper.
You're 100% wrong.
Oh, okay.
No, I'm just kidding. No. I'm just kidding. It's no.
However,
good.
do you want to correct this?
No, there's no correction.
Feel free.
There's no correction needed.
But what I would say is, it's once again, this isn't something totally separate. This is like the fulfillment of, and kind of like really pulling in the Old Testament and the New Testament together.
Yes.
And so instituting this,
love it.
Yeah, this supper, this Last Supper, how they did it, and then the Lord's Supper, how we do it today, which obviously it looks different.
Pales in comparison.
Right. It's excuse me, but it's how it's evolved and where it's come to, and so I think that part of it, I was reading in some pieces, and this is probably where you could speak more to it, but the idea of unleavened bread started in the Passover. They didn't have time for any of those things to happen. They were exiting Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
They were rolling out, and so there's like the one piece of it. How that bread pictures and symbolizes, the Lord's deliverance, like a fast, quick, exit.
They were out.
Yeah, fast.
They
quick,
had to be ready.
The exodus, the exit from Egypt. So there's that piece, and then there's the sin piece of how that leaven pictures sin.
Yes, and you had said here, there's a line in bold here in your notes, or at least that's how it came through when I copied it to a Google Doc. But how you handle open, unrepentant sexual sin matters, the old stuff mixing with the new stuff.
Right. Yeah. So you have a picture of what deliverance is supposed to look like, and that's where it's an immediate, this new creation. They exited Egypt. They were out from there. There was no time to have the old mixing with the new. The new was what it was, and that was the new standard, if you will. And we see that. We see that in our conversion. We see that in our exit from the world. We see that in the fact that we have all sufficiency in Jesus. He is our unleavened bread. His body is pure. It doesn't need anything of ours injected into it. There is no amount of time that it needs. Like, we are instantaneously delivered. There's so much there. There's so many different aspects. And of course, we don't have time to get into all of that on Sunday. So I just kind of wrote a paragraph of a lot of different things that's there in the program. So this is kind of like when Paul uses this imagery, he's hitting things for them that are understanding. And obviously they didn't quite wrap their heads around the Lord's Supper because they weren't doing it well. And we're going to read about that in the coming weeks. But
spoiler alert.
Yeah, he's going to bring it up specifically because it means something, right? So I think this is just another, it's another opportunity for Paul to bring, old covenant Jews that have that, perspective, the Judaizers coming into the church with this Gentile audience, where there's really nothing sacred.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so it definitely plays on both. And so it's just a perfect illustration for him to bring them into perspective, for him to bring them into community. That's the idea, into oneness, into unity.
Yeah.
So it's a perfect illustration, and for you, for the listener, we have to see that as being, number one, and I feel like we have a melting pot, we do, of people in our church. We're not I'm not making a strong distinction between Israel and the church, and I don't even know exactly where I land on all of that.
Me either. I feel like
it's messy.
Yeah, we could spend a whole couple hours on that.
Yep. But at this point, what I'm seeing is that they're not just related, they're connected, and they are intimately interwoven. And so, and that's how it was in the church. In that early church, it had everybody. It wasn't this two or both, and that's where I think that we just get weird in our philosophy, in our understanding of Scripture, and we have remnants of pieces of, different pastors and teachers through the years that have just come up with these weird, isolated views of Israel and the church. And so here we are, we're making the best of this. And I think that in this illustration, you can see Paul playing into both groups of people that are a part of the same church, and he's explaining to them that what's important is that you are pure before the Lord. You are holy before the Lord. You are viewing Jesus as enough, and his sacrifice and his body and what he has done for us. And so this is a really good time for us to take a step back and go, okay, what leaven are we bringing to the table?
Right. And to put leaven into the unleavened bread is essentially to bring bondage back into what we're freed from.
That's a weekend at Bernie's.
Yeah, straight up.
You're digging up your dead men's bones.
Yes.
And
I think to date that was probably the best sermon illustration you've ever done. And my only disappointment is that you did not call that message Weekend at Bernie's.
That's right. I should have. Yeah.
But that was such a good illustration of digging up the dead man that was buried and trying to parade him around, just like Weekend at Bernie's.
And that's what this church is doing.
Yeah.
They're parading their dead bones around, their dead body, their life that should have been buried in baptism and raised to walk in something that's new, something that's unleavened.
Yes. And it's neat that this illustration, like the concept is exclusively Jewish of the Passover, but the picture resonates with Gentiles also because it's such a simple thing. Like, hey, listen, like you all bake bread, like you know how this works.
Yep.
And it swings both ways. It hits the Jew a certain way, and it hits the Gentile a certain way. And it's so cool. Like you think about the Lord's Supper, and I feel like the West, not to poke fun, but we've cheapened it so much. And you have this picture, before the Sinai covenant was made, the elders of Israel went up the mountain and they had a meal with like the anthropomorphized Yahweh as a man at the top of Mount Sinai. And then in the New Testament, you have that same picture where the disciples are eating dinner with God as a man, but he's incarnate Jesus. And it like carries over and says like, and that's like, hey, the new covenant is about to begin, just like the old one was about to begin.
I love it.
And there's so much weight to the concept, but we're like, yeah, we just bulk order these gross little styrofoam things and some grape juice, and that's it. And like there's nothing inherently wrong with it because that's just where we are. But I feel like some of the sentiment is just lost.
It is. And I think how everything is lost in our type of lifestyle.
Right. In the Western lifestyle where we have to get everything done quickly, it's like an afterthought, and it's just the hustle and bustle really kills the sentiment,
My wife is among the minority of women that like bake bread.
Yeah. It's so good, by the way.
It is. My wife's
so
bread's
good.
Incredible.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, the way that we are trying to live and construct our home is just we're the minority.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate, because there are so many good things and good gifts from the Lord just in trying to structure. Sarah and I, here's a spoiler. I don't even know if I should
Spoiler alert.
No, I don't think I'm going to say it. We're working on something. That's all I'll say. We're working on something, and I think it's going to be extremely helpful. And we'll table that right there. But to look at the way Scripture,
we'll put that out for our Patreon supporters.
So stupid. But to look at how the Bible structures the home, right? And instead of saying, no, this is where we've come in a society, and this is what good looks like, and we're gonna put that image onto the Bible, and if it doesn't fit, we're going to get rid of those verses that we don't like.
Right.
If you take the Bible as God's word, and it is God's plan, right? And you apply that to your life, and you try to structure your life, and I'm not saying we're perfect, absolutely not, but you do your best to structure your life accordingly in the world that we are in.
Right. We're applying an ancient document to our modern context, and that's going to look different a lot of ways.
It's going to look different. But if you strive for that in its original intent, the Lord blesses that. And I just cannot even begin to tell you how much every time Sarah and I take another step towards trying to be more biblical in the way that we're living out our lives and raising our children and structuring our home, like it's always a gift that follows.
Yeah.
Always. And so just even in this imagery, it's like seeing these things, like they understood it, seeing the Lord's Supper the way we're trying to take it and administer it today. It's like, I think that if we did spend time and effort and energy preparing the bread and working through that, I think we would probably feel something a little bit more, but
that's just not our context.
It's not.
Currently.
Well, and
not to say that it couldn't be.
Well, do you remember Miss Alma?
Yes.
Coming in and pre-COVID,
Good stuff.
That's the idea behind that.
That's true. Now we've got it's 2-in-1, and I love it for the convenience. It's like bread on top, juice in the bottom, and it's just like, you know, dunk it a little bit.
But that was us, and if you listen to this, Miss Alma, we got to get back to that, But when we started baking the communion bread, it was like the first time Sarah did it, everybody was like, holy cow.
Right. What a difference.
What a difference. And then I think Miss Alma came in and helped her with that, right?
I believe so.
It's been a while.
I believe so, yeah.
But I think that was something she started doing and helping with. But to me, it's a different feel. It really is. Folded within and passing that out and around. And we'll have to figure out what that looks like, post-COVID. But to me, it's like some of these things, you can see the illustration, the imagery, it just brings new life to it.
It does.
And so I just challenge you with that take a look at your life. And Sarah and I, this is a low-hanging fruit here. We've had a couple of really busy weeks where it's just like boom, 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 run, go, 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 go. And the other night I was like, look, if we have to eat out another night, we have to eat out another night. But if we're going to eat out, we're going to go sit down at a restaurant and eat together, and so we did, but it's like, look, life is crazy and it's overwhelming. And some of that is self-induced, and we have a lot going on. We're not, it's multifaceted, our lives and what we're doing. And we're trying to do everything that we can to the glory of God. And we know we have a short time on this earth. But nonetheless, like, you have to take a step back sometimes and look and say, am I running in a circle? Am I on a hamster wheel? Is what I'm doing causing me to reflect and pull from the spirit that is within me to actually enjoy, And so I think Paul is really doing that with this church. He's saying, like, even in your sexuality, even in your leadership, in the Lord's Supper, all the things that you're doing, is this for your pleasure and for your enjoyment? If so, you're not going to get the fulfillment out of it that you could, or is this something that you're doing in the power of the cross, in the power of the gospel, and that takes just an ordinary meal and it transforms it.
That's so good.
Yeah. It takes
just like the bread.
The bread. It takes something that we're just going to go through the drive-through because we have to eat we just connected, anyway.
Yeah.
I'm rambling.
One last thing, if we have time before we go. One of the things that you said you did not get to yesterday during the 11 o'clock hour, which is the one that we record. We record both, but that's the one that goes up.
Yeah.
That way everybody's on the same page. But we didn't hit on the legal stuff. Do you have anything that you want to give us all? That way we have the full scope of what you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, so I just wanted to tie this in, and it was such a large portion of Scripture, but it goes all the way through chapter 6, verse 11. And Paul, he really, he doesn't take too much of a breath, and, he handles this sexual sin, and he says, look, you get the guy out of the church so that his soul can be saved. Kind of how I'm taking that there. But then he turns and he says, basically, I'm trying to find the passage of Scripture here. I think it's verse number 7 in chapter 6, kind of the last portion here. He says, as it is to have legal disputes against one another, is already a defeat for you. Why not rather be wronged? That right there, we do not want to hear that as the church. Here's the next question he asks. Why not rather be cheated? Instead, you yourselves do wrong and cheat. And you do this to brothers and sisters. Don't you know that the unrighteous will not inherit God's kingdom? Do not be deceived.
Oof.
So, and I thought you would pull more on this, but he talks about we're going to rule over angels. Like, we're going to govern this thing. We're going to be not just sons and daughters. Like, we're going to be a part of this council. You know, we're going to be working in that. In this new heaven, new earth, you know, we're going to be leaders. We're going to be judges. And those are things that we are going to determine. And Paul's like, you're not acting like it. Mm-hmm. You're literally judging and determining what happens in your church community by people who are not Christ followers. Isn't my moral code, isn't the gospel of a higher order, of a higher authority? You're going to be even above angels, and you're operating at a level below the angels.
Yeah.
So it's just such a good thing here, but I think what it boils down to is pride once again. And so this is... I put this, it's better for us to be taken advantage of than for us to stain the name for retribution. If we know the Lord is in control, then allow him to lead in the areas of disagreement. The same feeling of us choosing our own pleasure in our sin, and I'm specifically referencing sexual sin there, instead of denying ourselves and doing what is right, is parallel to our need to be right and justified by someone who is not a believer, so that we can be vindicated in some way.
Yeah.
The root is preferring ourselves rather than dying to ourselves. And that, my brothers and sisters, is a matter of pride. So I think that it's important for us to view the legal issues that Paul is addressing. And just to come right out and say it, it's not okay for brothers and sisters to be suing each other, is what Paul is saying.
Yeah.
Do not take each other to court. And at the end result, if one of you feels like you've been taken advantage of, Paul is saying there's space for that in the gospel.
Right. It's better to be taken advantage of than to stain a name.
It is so better. Good. It's better for you to lose your money. It's better for you to lose what pride you think you had than for you to say to a lost and dying world, we need you, lost world, to come in here into this arena and solve a problem between two believers. Why? Because ultimately, in the book of Proverbs says this, only by pride cometh contention. So the idea is if one or the other humbles themselves, the problem can be resolved. Well, they took my money. Oh, well, you lost. And that loss is something that we experience loss and suffering in the gospel. Jesus experienced loss and suffering so that we could have life, right? That's how it works. So when we submit ourselves to the hard things that happen in life, and when we determine that we are going to handle it with a gospel-centered mentality, that means we're okay to suffer, we're okay to lose, and we don't hang a lot of times our identity is tied to our success in those areas of business, and so that's one problem. You know, Jesus is like, first of all, that's not where you get your success. So we can't have our identity tied up in the image that we present in this world. We have to have our identity tied up in the image of God, because we're here bearing his image, not the image of the world. And so that should show out. And so that's why I just tied it together.
That's good.
In that.
And to have our identity tied up in the image and not our fiscal or business success is to, I'm going to have to cut this because I just totally, my mind train just...
No, you don't have to cut it. It's all good. To have it tied up in the image of God and not in the image
is to not care.
That's right.
Is to not care. Like, I got taken advantage of, but that's just part of it.
It's to be okay with that loss. It's to be okay with that problem. And it doesn't have to be resolved this side of heaven. That problem, and this is something that we just really need to get, that problem, that issue is needed. That how you deal with that, how you deal with that health issue, how you deal with that thing that the world looks at as being ultimately failure, and you give God glory in it, that is the power of the cross.
That's the power of the cross.
And that's what we
have to get. And when we
get.
refuse to accept that, we're emptying the cross of its power.
We're emptying it of its power.
And that's what Paul's getting at.
Yeah. Which is why the prosperity gospel is so
bad.
It is just garbage. It crushes, it kills. And that's where I think that, as ministry leaders, like, we have to think circumspectly. We have to, and I'm not saying that we need to put on sackcloth and ashes. That's not what I'm saying. But just in a practical sense of the word, there is a sense of resolve. Paul said, I know how to be abased and I know how to abound, both to be full and to be hungry. Mm-hmm. That's a posture that in whatsoever state he's content.
And then he follows up with that, with the most taken out of context verse.
I can do all things.
I can do all things.
That's
through
right.
him who strengthens me.
Yeah. And it's not saying, most people that quote, I can do all things through Christ which strengthens me, are quoting that
when they're making a touchdown or something.
Exactly.
Not when they're choosing to deprive themselves of something.
It's both.
Mm-hmm.
It is both.
Yeah.
And I think there's examples of pastors and missionaries and folks that are in ministry through the years that have endured incredible suffering and incredible loss, the loss of a child, where they have experienced incredible growth in ministry.
Yeah.
And I would say that it's not because of their power or the way they say things. It's because of the loss.
Yeah.
It's because of the way that they have accepted the things that the Lord has done in their life. And listen, and I'm not saying that they've done it in a glorious way. Like, there's no parent wants to lose a child.
Yeah.
No parent wants something bad to happen like that. No one wants that, but it's how we endure that. And that's the theme of James. Or was it James or 1 Peter? I think it was James.
How do we endure suffering?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a part of it. And I'm not saying it's all of it, but I get that sense here where he's like, look, it's better for you to be taken advantage of. So it's not popular, but that's where we really find this idea that pride is the problem. And if we humble ourselves, what is going to happen, Cody, with a church, with Bethlehem, that has just a bunch of Christ followers that are unashamed? Because that's what I think Paul's talking about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What would that look like?
What would it look like if we had a ton of people who are okay to look like fools to the world? What would the Lord do with that? Oh, my goodness.
It's good stuff to think about.
Yeah.
Well, hey, we're looking forward to next week's message. Do you have a title for that yet? No?
Do you have a title is what I should say.
Oh, I'm preaching this week. Man. Okay. Well, hey, I'm looking forward to this week's message. And so we'll end our broadcast with this line here at the end of your notes here. And if you want access to these notes, they're in the program, or they're notes from the program, but the hyperlink is in the description of the post here, or on Spotify. You'll find it, or on YouTube. But the line is, may we humble ourselves and find unity among our brokenness. Amen. So good. Amen. We love you, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for tuning in.